Now, kindly analyze the illustration. So again, the sum of potential energy and kinetic energy is just the total mechanical energy. Now, if you notice, the potential energy changes. Ayun. The kinetic energy changes. So for example, at this point, hulaton na to siya diri ha. At this point, the potential energy is dako kayo. And then magkagamay, kinetic energy na pod. Then kinetic energy magkagamay, potential energy na pod. And then kinetic energy, and then potential energy, kinetic energy magkagamay, potential energy magkataas. Tama? So potential energy and kinetic energy changes. However, the total mechanical energy, the sum of potential and kinetic energy remains constant. Ayun, it remains the same. Pareho lang. So that is conservation of mechanical energy. What is being conserved? The total energy. So total energy lang. So for example, in this case, potential energy, does it mean that potential energy is being destroyed? Potential energy is lost? Does it mean that at this point here, does it mean that at this point here, the potential energy is being created? Yan, created. Again, according to the definition of conservation of energy, energy cannot be created. It cannot be destroyed, but it can only be transformed from one form to another. So in this situation, what is being transformed? Potential energy into kinetic energy, or kinetic energy into potential energy. But the sum, the mechanical energy remains constant. It remains the same. Another example. For example, at this point, red, asang red. At this point, the potential energy is at its maximum kasi nasa may height siya, may certain height. Potential energy is maximum, maximum, ayun, maximum. While the kinetic energy is at its minimum. So max, minimum, at the highest point. Now at the lowest point, dito sa pinakababa, the potential energy is at its lowest, minimum. Why? Because nasa ground level na siya. While the kinetic energy is at its maximum. Mutaas magid ang speed, tama? Mukusog man ang speed, kusog ang speed. So maximum kinetic energy. Now, for example, the potential energy at this point is pila man? 20 joules. And the kinetic energy is pila man? 10 joules. 10 joules na? Sige, 10 joules. So that means the sum of both potential energy and kinetic energy, and total energy is 30 joules. Okay? Follow pa? Okay. Now at this point, the potential energy is 0. Kaya na naman siya sa ground level. Potential energy is 0, and then the kinetic energy, what will be the value of our kinetic energy? Pila dapat? It should be 30 joules. Para 0 plus 30 is 30 joules. What is being conserved is the sum of our potential energy and our kinetic energy. Do you follow? For example lang na siya, ha? Okay. So what if at this point? At this point, the potential energy is 15, for example. 15 joules. Then what will be the value of its kinetic energy?
Not sure.
30. Dapat ang sum nila is 30, dapat ang sum. So since potential energy is 15, that means what will be the value of our kinetic
15.
energy? It should be 15 joules. Para pag i-add nimo sila, 30 gihapon. Okay, do you follow? So what is being conserved is the total, the mechanical energy. Okay, another example. What if at this point, the potential energy is 18. Ay, nganong nidako man dapat mo gamay. The potential energy is 12. Then that means our kinetic energy will be pila? It should be pila gani 18. It should be 18. 18 joules. Para ang sum nilang duha 30 joules. Now at this point, for example, the potential energy is 8 joules. Then our kinetic energy must be 22 joules. Do you follow? Para pag i-add mo sila 30 gyapon. Nakuha? Sige daw, last example. At this point, our potential energy, for example, is 5 joules. Then our kinetic energy is what? Yes, it should be 25 joules. So para pag i-add mo silang duha, 30. So i-minus lang good. 30 minus 5, di 25. Okay, so that is conservation of energy. Do you follow? Okay, so let us apply this concept dito sa ating some example. So potential energy, we have na daw bola, gipaligid nimo ang bola, ang isa kay gi-drop. So potential energy is 100 joules, kinetic energy is 0 joules, and then mass is 5 kilograms. So at this point here, the potential energy is 50 joules daw. So i-add lang nimo nin duha. Pila may sum ani nila? 100 joules. So potential energy is 50 joules. Then what will be the value of its kinetic energy? Of course, dali na kayo, i-minus lang. 100 minus 50, it should be 50 joules. Para pag i-add nimo silang doha, 50 plus 50 is also 100. It will be conserved. Now, how about the velocity? Paano natin i-solve si velocity? So si velocity is just related sa ating kinetic energy. Maghimo na lang kog magic triangle ha. Potential energy is equivalent to mgh. Familiar na sa paggamit sa magic triangle, no? So if you are going to solve for the mass, it is just potential energy divided by gh. If you are going to solve for the h, tabuni lang si h, it is potential energy divided by mg. So that is how you use the magic triangle. Now for kinetic energy, what's the formula sa kinetic energy? Kinetic energy is equal to 1/2 mv squared. V squared. So we can cross multiply lang si 2 para wala tay fraction. So cross multiply, it will become 2ke. I-multiply lang ako og 2 ha. Must be equal to mv squared. Ayan. So yan yung magic triangle natin. So in this case, ang hinahanap natin si velocity. So ito. So that will give us velocity squared is equal to 2ke over mass. So take the square root kay naa may square root. So that is just equal to square root of 2 times the kinetic energy, which is 50 joules, divided by the mass, which is 5 kilograms. And that will give us 4.47 meters per second. And how many significant figures lang ang kailangan natin? We only need one significant figure. So that means our final answer must be 4 meters per second. So 4. O diba? Ganun lang kadali. Okay, how about at this point? So since they are just along the same height, the same lang man sila height. So that means the same lang din sila ng potential energy, 50. The same lang din sila ng kinetic energy, 50. Then that means the same lang din sila ng velocity, 4. Because they are at the same height. So copy lang. Kung say value diri, copy lang nimo diri because same height lang man sila. Nakuha? Yes, Stephanie, you have a question? How about at this point? This is now the lowest level. This is the ground level at the ground. Now take note, kapag ka-ground yan, ibig sabihin our potential energy is 0. Kay ground naman. Automatic na, potential energy is 0. Follow. So what will be the value of our kinetic energy? Sige daw, si Stephanie, kay siya man akong una nakita diri. Steph, are you there, Steph?
Sir.
What will be the value of our kinetic energy, Steph? Dito.
100.
Very good. Bakit 100 dapat, Steph?
0 ang potential energy. So,
very good. So dapat 100 ang sum nila, no? Okay, thank you, Steph. So 100 joules. Now, how about velocity? Substitute lang dito sa imong equation. Velocity is square root of 2 times 100 joules, kinetic energy man, divided by 5 kilograms. And that will give us, pila? 200 divided by 5 square root 6.32 meters per second. One significant figure. So that means our final answer must only contain one significant figure. So 6 meters per second. Ayun, no, di ba? Okay, let's have another problem. Last example. Hala, unsa naman na, sir? Labaw na niya i-quiz kay pag quiz na to, kuan man ang example mga roller coaster o mga conservation of energy, mga ng roller coaster. So kinetic energy is 0 joules at the top, and then potential energy is 50,000 joules, and then the height is 100 meters. So tatawagin natin itong point B, kasi point A naman na, point B, point C, point D, and point P. So again, it is just arbitrary. Depende sa mo sa imong itawagan na sila. Okay, so at point A, so may color ha, violet na lang. At point A, the kinetic energy is 0 joules. The potential energy is 50,000 joules, and the height H is 100 meters. Again, two significant figures ta para madlahi po. Two significant figures. Okay, so say wala diri. So mass, wala tay mass. So we need to solve for the mass. Asa man related si mass? Related si mass sa potential energy. Napoy potential energy, mass. Napoy kinetic energy, mass. So it's either, however, the kinetic energy is 0. So that means we cannot use the kinetic energy to solve for mass. So ang gagamitin natin si potential energy. Mass is equivalent to, sa formula sa mass, potential energy divided by GH. Potential energy divided by GH. So potential energy is 50,000 joules, two significant figures, divided by 9.81 meters per second squared, multiplied by the height, which is 100 meters. Ayun. So that will give us pila? 50,000 divided by 9.81 divided by 100. That will give us 50.96 and so on kilograms. How many significant figures? Dalawa. So our final answer must only contain two significant figures. So mass is just 51 kilograms. 51 kilograms. Do you follow? So that means velocity at this point is 0 meters per second. Bakit 0, sir? Kasi our kinetic energy is 0. So that means our velocity is also 0. Okay na? Sige. So we will proceed with letter B. Si letter B daw, equivalent lang siya og height kay letter D. Pareho naman sila height. So any value sa letter D will just be the same as the values for letter B. Nakuha? So isolve lang nato si letter D. And ang given sa letter D, unsa lay given? Height lang. Height, which is 60 meters, two significant figures. Umulay gihatag. So potential energy unknown. Kinetic energy is also unknown. And the velocity is also unknown. So, unsa man nato ni pag-solve karon? So, unsa may given? Ang given nato is height lang. Asa man related si height? Height is related to potential energy. Ayun. Wala may height si kinetic energy. So that means we can solve for potential energy. Kay height is related to potential energy. So solve potential energy. Potential energy is equal to M, mass is 51 kilograms, times 9.81 meters per second squared, times the height, which is 60 meters, two significant figures. So that will give us an answer of 51 times 9.81 times 60. That will give us 30,000. Red pala. 30,018.6 joules. So how many significant figures? We need two significant figures. So that means our final answer must be 30,000 joules. Significant ang isang zero. 30,000 joules. Ayan. O, di ba? Ganun lang. How about its kinetic energy? Sige daw, binapa ba ni na remember? How about its kinetic energy? May I ask? Si Alec. Alec Edmond, are you there, Alec?
Yes, sir.
What will be the value of our kinetic energy, Alec? If our potential energy is 30,000.
20,000, sir.
Bakit 20,000, Alec?
Kasi 30,000 ang potential energy, sir, and dapat equal siya sa 50,000 ng sum.
Very, very good. Oh, so ganun lang. O di ba? So yun ra kayo, no? Solve lang. Now, how about its velocity? So to solve for its velocity, gamit lang tong equation. Square root of 2 times kinetic energy, which is 20,000 joules, divided by the mass, which is 51 kilograms. And that will give us 28.00 meters per second. Two significant figures. So our final answer must be 28. So 28. Di ba? So that means our answer for letter B will just be the same. Pareho lang. So may color sa letter B, green. So ang sa letter B, height is 60. The potential energy is also 30 kilojoules. Kilo means 1,000, ha? Kinetic energy will be 20 kilojoules, 20,000. And then the velocity is 28 meters per second. Okay. So for your assignment, kindly calculate for the potential energy, kinetic energy, velocity, and mechanical energy dito sa point C and point E. So try to solve for the following variables. Again, hindi ko to i-record, ha, hindi ko siya i-grade. Formative lang siya, formative. Just to check if you are understanding, if you understood the lesson. Nako, so kindly solve for kinetic, potential, and velocity, as well as mechanical. Pero constant man si mechanical, so no need to solve.